Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. She was on her knees, 12 years old, on a cafeteria floor, cleaning spilled milk with a paper napkin, while the students around her laughed and pointed phones in her direction. Her small shoulders were curved inward, her face was turned down toward the tiles, and she was doing everything in her power to make herself as small and as invisible as possible, because she had learned over 7 long months that invisibility was the only protection she had in that room. Her father was standing in the doorway. He had been there for less than 30 seconds. He had driven 2 hours to surprise her on her birthday. He was holding a paper bag with 2 sandwiches inside, turkey and Swiss, extra pickles, her favorite, and he had not yet taken a single step into the room because his legs would not move, because his mind could not yet reconcile what his eyes were seeing with the world he believed his daughter lived in every day. He had asked her every single evening for 7 months how school was. She had smiled every single time and said 2 words, "School's good." And he had believed her. Because she was his daughter, because she was brave and careful and loved him enough to carry the weight of this alone, rather than add it to everything else he was already carrying. And now he was standing in a doorway, holding birthday sandwiches, while his child knelt on a cold floor and a room full of people watched and did nothing. And the full, devastating truth of those 7 months was assembling itself before him, piece by piece. And there was nothing. No title, no credential, no carefully maintained composure that could protect a father from a moment like this one. The paper bag slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the floor. No one noticed. Daniel Carter was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the particular stillness of a man who had learned early that the world responds differently to a black man who raises his voice than to one who remains absolutely, dangerously calm. He had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a small house where his father mopped floors in the local school building and his mother taught 3rd grade for 31 years without ever once calling in sick. They had given him 2 things above everything else: dignity and discipline. And he had carried both with him every step of the long, hard road from that small house to the most powerful education office in the United States government. He was the Secretary of Education. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, he was a father, and his daughter was on her knees, and he had to understand what he was looking at before he decided what to do about it. He stepped quietly to the side, behind a wide structural column near the entrance, and he watched. And as he watched, the full shape of the world his daughter had been surviving slowly came into focus around him, and it was worse, far worse, than the single image of a child on a cafeteria floor. Ridgewood Academy was not the kind of school Daniel had attended as a child. It was all glass and marble and manicured lawns, the kind of institution whose glossy brochures promised excellence and belonging in equal measure. He had enrolled Alina not for its reputation, but for its advanced science program, because Alina wanted to study the stars, and he had promised her mother, 3 years gone now, gone too quietly and too soon, that he would give their daughter every door he could open. He had paid the full tuition. He had attended every orientation. He had shaken hands with the principal and read through the school's equity policies and believed, the way parents desperately need to believe, that the place he was leaving his child every morning was safe. The cafeteria told a different story. The sunlit center of the room was filled with long tables and comfortable chairs, students eating and laughing and moving through the world with the effortless confidence of those who have never once been made to feel unwelcome anywhere. The windows were large and warm, the light was generous. It was the kind of room that photographs beautifully for brochures. But in the far corner, near the back exit, where the light did not quite reach and a fluorescent tube buzzed and flickered like it was struggling to survive, another world existed entirely. Hard wooden benches, backs against the wall, 7 students eating quickly and quietly, eyes down, bodies turned slightly inward, occupying the smallest and most invisible corner of the room with the practiced resignation of children who had been placed there and told, without words, to stay. Every single one of them was Black or Latino. Every single one of them wore the expression of someone who has made peace with something they should never have had to make peace with. Alina had been sitting in that corner every day for 7 months. Daniel stood behind that column and felt something move through him that had no clean name. Not quite rage, not quite grief, but something that lived in the space between them, something slow and deep and permanent. Then Margaret Whitfield crossed the floor again. She was the cafeteria supervisor, a tall woman with sharp features and the particular brand of authority that comes not from being respected, but from never having been seriously challenged. She moved through the room as though it belonged to her, and she stopped in front of Alina with the air of someone who had done this many times before and expected the same outcome she always got: silence, compliance, and the quiet disappearance of a problem back into its assigned corner. She did not get that this time. Alina looked up at her and said, in a voice that was quiet but entirely clear, that her father paid the same tuition as everyone else. It was a brave thing to say, more brave than most adults would have managed, and Margaret Whitfield responded to that bravery the way small, cruel authority always responds to it, by making an example. Her voice rose so the room could hear. She spoke about real families and real contributions. She said the word charity like it was something dirty. She pointed toward the corner near the garbage bins, and she told a 12-year-old girl in front of a room full of her peers to get back where she belonged. Some students laughed, some filmed, and some simply watched, doing nothing, which in its own way was the saddest thing of all. Alina's eyes filled with tears. She rose slowly from the bench and began to walk toward the corner with her tray, her shoulders shaking with the effort of not crying in front of all of them. She had nearly made it when Margaret stepped forward one final time, leaned down close to the girl's face, and said something so small and so vicious and so deeply, historically familiar that it landed in the room like something that had been waiting a long time to be said out loud. Then came the slap. It was not hard enough to leave a mark. It was hard enough to make a point. The room went quiet. And behind the column, Daniel Carter closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He was not composing himself. He was not managing his emotions. He was doing something far more deliberate than that. He was making a decision about what kind of man he was going to be in the next 10 minutes, and in the 10 years after that, and in every moment his daughter would one day look back on when she thought about the Tuesday her father walked into the cafeteria and saw the truth. He opened his eyes. He took out his phone and pressed record. He documented every remaining second of what Margaret Whitfield said and did in that cafeteria. Every word, every gesture, every casual, comfortable cruelty, with the steady hand of a man who understands that the most powerful weapon available to the powerless has always been the undeniable, unedited truth. Then he stopped recording. He put his phone in his pocket, and he walked out from behind the column. The shift in the room was immediate. Students noticed him. Teachers turned their heads. Margaret Whitfield was in the middle of a sentence when she registered the quiet, gray-coated man crossing the cafeteria floor toward her, and she stopped speaking, and she turned, and her expression settled into the particular condescension she reserved for parents who came to her room uninvited and unimpressive. Daniel walked past her without a glance. He walked directly to his daughter, and he knelt beside her, and he placed one hand gently on her shoulder. Alina looked up, and her face moved through shock and relief, and something that broke and healed at the same time, all in the space of a single silent breath. "Dad," she whispered. Just that one word, but in it was everything. 7 months of silence, 7 months of carried weight, 7 months of a 12-year-old girl waking up every morning and choosing to be braver than she had any right to have to be. "I'm here," he said softly. "You're safe now." Margaret Whitfield stepped forward and demanded to know who he was and what he thought he was doing in her cafeteria. Daniel rose to his full height. He turned and looked at her with a calm so complete and so quiet that several students near the front tables stopped eating entirely. He told her he was Alina's father. He told her they needed to have a conversation. And when she responded with contempt, when she looked at this still, gray-coated man and dismissed him with the same reflexive cruelty she had been dispensing all morning, she made the last and most consequential mistake of a very long career. She had no idea who was standing in front of her. 35 minutes later, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Ridgewood Academy became something no one inside those walls would ever forget. The sound came first, the low, rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors settling over the building. Then the black SUVs moving through the parking lot in tight, unhurried formation. Then the federal agents entering through the main doors and the side entrance simultaneously, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this before and have no interest in theatrics. Students pressed against the cafeteria windows. Teachers stood in the hallways looking at each other. Principal Robert Langford was escorted from his office with the pale, slightly unfocused expression of a man whose morning had taken a turn he had no framework for understanding. When he and Margaret Whitfield were brought together into the front office, they found Daniel Carter sitting calmly behind the principal's desk. His federal credentials were open on the table in front of him. The seal caught the light. United States Secretary of Education. Margaret Whitfield's hand went to the edge of the desk to steady herself. Daniel pressed a button on the laptop. The cafeteria security footage began to play. Every word, every moment of public humiliation, every carefully delivered cruelty, time-stamped and undeniable, and playing in full on the screen in front of the two people who had made it possible. He let it run to the end without speaking. Then he spoke quietly into the silence that followed, and what he said was not a speech and not a threat, but simply a clear and factual accounting of what had been documented, what laws had been violated, what investigations would follow, and what the consequences would be for a school that had systematically separated its students by race and enforced that separation through intimidation and physical force. The federal agent stepped forward. The handcuffs clicked. And for the first time all day, the cafeteria, still visible through the office window, was completely, entirely silent. Daniel walked back through the building alone. The hallways were empty now. His footsteps were quiet on the polished floor. He pushed open the cafeteria doors and walked to the far corner of the room, under the flickering fluorescent light, and he sat down on the hard wooden bench beside his daughter, not across from her, beside her, on the same bench, under the same broken light. He reached into the paper bag that someone had quietly retrieved from near the entrance and placed on the bench beside him. He unwrapped both sandwiches and set hers in front of her without a word. Turkey and Swiss. Extra pickles. Alina looked at the sandwich for a long moment. Then she looked at her father. And then, for the first time in 7 months, she cried. Not the silent, controlled tears of a child trying to disappear, but the full, exhausted, relieved tears of someone who has been strong for far too long and has finally been given permission to put it down. Daniel put his arm around her and held her while the cafeteria slowly returned to life around them. He did not offer her easy words or smooth the moment over with comfort that the moment did not deserve. He simply stayed. Present and still, and entirely, unmovably there, which was, in the end, the only thing she had ever needed him to be. They sat in that corner together until she was ready to stand up, and when she was ready, they stood up together and walked out through the center of the room, through the warm afternoon light that fell through those tall windows, and not a single person in that cafeteria said a word. The following Monday, Alina Carter returned to Ridgewood Academy. She walked into the cafeteria, She looked around the room, and she chose a table, any table she wanted, and she sat down, and she opened her lunch, and she ate in the warm, easy light of the center of the room, as though she had always belonged there. Because she had. She always had. There is something in this story that deserves to be carried forward. Not as anger, though anger here would be understandable, not as bitterness, though bitterness would be earned, but as a reminder, quiet and persistent, that the children in our lives are often surviving things we cannot see, in corners we have never visited, with a courage we have never been asked to witness. They protect us from their pain because they love us. And the most important thing we can do as parents, as neighbors, as human beings who share this world with them is to keep showing up, to keep asking, to refuse to accept the careful smile and the too quiet words as the whole story. Because sometimes the whole story is waiting in a corner under a flickering light, and it needs someone to walk in and finally see it. If this story reached something in you today, if it reminded you that love, when it finally steps forward, can change everything, then you are exactly why this channel exists. Please take a moment right now and subscribe to Beyond the Badge. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone in your life who needs to be reminded that showing up matters, that one person walking through the right door at the right moment can change a child's entire world. Every week, we bring you the stories that deserve to be told, the quiet heroes, the unnoticed sacrifices, the moments of dignity that happen when no one is recording, and the moments of courage that happen when someone finally is. This is Beyond the Badge. We will see you in the next one.